Hello friends, back again with another video on ancient Egypt. Well, Professor Breyer is our presenter of the history of ancient Egypt. This is an audio book that I purchased on Amazon, so hopefully I will not get flagged. Otherwise I have to produce receipts. But that being said and out the way, ancient Egypt is a history of black people, but it's not the whole history. It's just a section, just a part of history. Egyptians were great builders. They build structures, they build communities, and the DNA of that greatness can be seen in the people today, especially black people in America, the American Negroes, as I like to call them. Throughout our history in America, we have made great strides to prove to society that we're just as good as they are, if not better in some cases. We've made progress in almost every major field: hair care, health, as far as medical health, as far as foods that you eat. I was watching something about what was it? The history of Ford? No, it was the guy that started the Ford Motor Company. What is his name? Henry Ford. And at one time, Henry Ford wanted his workers to eat healthier, to keep productivity up. And he collaborated with a botanist on alternative food sources, soybeans and stuff of that nature. Well, this botanist that he collaborated with was a black man by the name of George Washington Carver. Not only did George help Henry Ford, but he also did work for the government. And I applaud that man. I applaud that man because in a time of straight up pure racism, he seemed to see the greater good. So all these racist white men going to the service, eating their rations, a major part of why they got the nutrition that they needed was because of a black man, I should say. But even outside of the military, on the plantations, for the most part, white people weren't cooking their own food, which is crazy because they gave us the scraps, but it was the black person, it was the black women that was the cooks, the maids, the nannies. And they still do that. They still have maids. Rich people still have maids. They still have nannies. But they tried to move away from using black people because they didn't want to pay black people. They felt black people were inferior to them. And that could be further from the truth. That's just not it. So The purpose of this channel, as everybody knows, once it's on the internet, it's there forever. And this is my library to the world. This is my library of how I view the world. Now, let's dive into Professor Breyer's explanation of ancient Egypt, leaving off with Ramses' son. So without further ado.
Hi, welcome back. Remember last time we talked about the Exodus and how possibly, just possibly, Ramses might be the pharaoh of the Exodus. He's the greatest king of the 19th dynasty. But after his reign, Egypt sort of starts to slide and go downhill. And I want to talk about that slide, but I'd like to also talk about, I don't want to leave you without telling you about Ramses' mummy. It's a great story. I want to tell you about the mummy of Ramses the Great, because it maybe gives us a clue as to why Egypt started its long slide. The mummy was found in the famous cache of royal mummies at Deir el-Bahari that we talked about, when the priest kings had gathered together mummies for safety because there were robberies in the Valley of the Kings. Ramses was one of those mummies that was put away in a secret tomb and remained undisturbed for 3,000 years. Now, the mummy tells a great story. First, after the mummy was discovered, it was brought to Cairo to be placed into a museum, right? And it's now in the Egyptian Museum. You can actually see the mummy of Ramses the Great. It may be the only face you ever look on of a biblical figure, right? I mean, think about it. How many actual faces from the Bible can you see? But Ramses' mummy remained in the Egyptian Museum for about a century almost, untouched practically. And that was the problem. The mummy was viewed as a dead person rather than a museum object, so there was no conservation done on it. And in the humid atmosphere of Cairo, it was starting to grow fungi, right? And it was starting to decay. You could actually see 19th century photos of Ramses and 20th century photos of Ramses, and you could see the decay. So something had to be done. Now, the mummy of Ramses the Great is the only pharaoh's mummy ever to leave Egypt, right? It was decided that Ramses had to be refurbished, saved. So the mummy was flown to France. It was going to be worked on at the Museum of Man by a team of scientists to see what they could do about stopping the fungi, reversing the